I still remember the way my husband looked at me across that mahogany table in the lawyer's office, his eyes cold as winter steel, his mouth twisted into something that used to be a smile but had turned into pure contempt. "I'll take everything from you," Marcus said, his voice dripping with confidence that came from 32 years of me building him up, supporting him, believing in him. This is the mental grand, and this is the story of how my husband's greed became the architect of his own destruction. We'd been married for 3 decades. 30 years of waking up next to someone who I thought was my partner, my best friend, the father of our 2 children. 30 years of supporting his career while mine took a back seat. 30 years of making our house a home while he climbed the corporate ladder at Henderson and Associates, one of the most prestigious investment firms in Chicago. I was Rebecca Morrison, 47 years old, and I had just discovered that the man I'd loved since college had been planning my erasure for over 2 years. The affair was almost predictable in its cliché nature. 31-year-old Amber from his office, all long legs and ambitious eyes, the kind of woman who saw Marcus not as a man, but as a stepping stone. But it wasn't just the affair that cut me. It was the systematic, calculated way he'd been moving our assets, manipulating our finances, preparing to leave me with nothing while he rode off into his midlife crisis sunset with his new trophy. What Marcus didn't know, what he couldn't have known because he'd stopped really seeing me years ago, was that I wasn't the same wide-eyed girl he'd married. I had my own career before the kids came, before I'd put my accounting degree and my sharp mind into managing our household instead of managing corporate books. And I'd been paying attention. I'd been paying very close attention. That day in the lawyer's office, 3 weeks after I'd found the texts, the secret credit cards, the lease agreement for a downtown condo I'd never seen, Marcus laid out his terms with the confidence of a man who thought he'd already won. His attorney, some shark named Richard Paulson, who wore suits that cost more than our monthly mortgage, slid papers across the table while Marcus watched me with something that looked like pity mixed with triumph. "Mrs. Morrison," Paulson said, his voice smooth as expensive whiskey, "my client is willing to be generous. He'll take primary ownership of the house, the investment portfolio, and the cabin in Wisconsin. You'll receive a modest settlement and can keep your car." He paused, letting that word modest hang in the air like an insult. "In exchange, we expect a quick, quiet divorce. No fuss, no fighting. Sign these papers and we can all move forward." I looked down at those papers, at the numbers that represented 30 years of my life being reduced to whatever Marcus decided I was worth, the house we'd bought together, that I'd decorated room by room, where I'd hosted countless dinners for his colleagues and investors, the investment portfolio I'd helped build with careful budgeting and sacrifice, the cabin that had been my idea, my dream, where I'd spent summers with our kids while Marcus worked 70-hour weeks. That's when something inside me crystallized into diamond-hard resolve. I looked up at Marcus, and for the first time in weeks, I smiled. Not a sad smile, not a defeated smile, but something that made his eyes flicker with uncertainty. "I'll need some time to review these," I said calmly, gathering the papers. "I'll have my attorney contact yours." "You don't have an attorney," Marcus said, and I could hear the smugness in his voice. He thought I was bluffing, playing for time, maybe hoping he'd change his mind and come back home. "I do now," I replied, standing up. As I walked out of that office, I could feel their eyes on my back, could imagine them exchanging glances, probably congratulating themselves on how easy I was going to be to steamroll. They had no idea what was coming. My attorney's name was Catherine Zhao, and she was everything Marcus's fancy shark wasn't. She was a 53-year-old woman who'd built her practice specializing in complex divorces where one spouse tried to hide assets. More importantly, she was a woman who'd been through her own nightmare divorce and had come out the other side with fire in her eyes and an encyclopedic knowledge of every trick in the book. When I met with Catherine for the first time in her modest but professional office in Lincoln Park, I brought three things: a flash drive, a notebook, and 30 years of institutional knowledge about my husband's business dealings. What I showed her that day made her lean back in her chair and let out a low whistle. "Mrs. Morrison," Catherine said, "I think we need to talk about what you've been doing for the past 3 weeks." The truth was, I'd been preparing. The moment I found those texts between Marcus and Amber, the moment I saw the way he'd been moving money, I'd done something Marcus never expected from his quiet, supportive wife. I'd started documenting everything, every account, every transfer, every asset. I'd used the access I had as his wife, the accounts we shared, the passwords I knew because I'd been managing our household finances for 30 years, and I'd created a complete picture of our financial life. But more than that, I'd found something that Marcus thought was buried so deep, hidden in such complex corporate structures that no one would ever connect it back to him. I'd found the evidence that Marcus had been doing more than just having an affair. He'd been embezzling from Henderson and Associates for 3 years, moving money through shell companies, hiding assets, preparing for the day he could leave both me and his job behind and start fresh with Amber and a fortune that wasn't entirely his. Catherine looked at the documents I'd compiled, the trail I'd followed, and she smiled. "Do you know what this means?" she asked. "It means Marcus isn't just betraying me," I said quietly. "It's betraying his partners, his investors, everyone who trusted him." "And it means," Catherine continued, "we have leverage, significant leverage." But I didn't want leverage. I didn't want to threaten Marcus or blackmail him. What I wanted was something far more satisfying. I wanted justice. Real justice, the kind that comes from not threats, but from truth. Over the next 6 weeks, while Marcus thought I was scrambling to find a way to survive on his terms, Catherine and I built a case, not just for the divorce, but for everything. We documented every hidden asset, every shell company, every fraudulent transfer. We traced the money Marcus had taken from his firm through 3 different states and 5 different corporate entities. We found the offshore account in the Cayman Islands. We found the real estate investments he'd made under his mistress's name. And then Catherine did something brilliant. She reached out to Henderson and Associates, not to Marcus's partners directly, but to their forensic accounting team. She suggested they might want to do a routine audit of their senior partner's accounts. Just routine, just standard procedure, nothing to worry about. The dominoes started falling faster than Marcus could have imagined possible. It was a Thursday afternoon when Marcus came home unexpectedly. I was in the kitchen, making coffee, when I heard his car in the driveway. He burst through the door, his face red, his eyes wild with something between panic and rage. This was a side of Marcus I'd rarely seen, the side that only came out when he felt cornered, when his perfect world was cracking. "What did you do?" he demanded, and his voice shook. "What the hell did you do, Rebecca?" I turned slowly, coffee mug in hand, and looked at the man I'd married. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, like someone had let the air out of his inflated ego. "I did nothing," I said calmly. "I simply stopped protecting you from your own choices." "Henderson called me today," Marcus said, and his voice dropped to something almost like a whisper. "They're asking about accounts I can't explain, transfers I can't justify. Rebecca, they're talking about bringing in federal investigators. They're talking about fraud charges." "Are they?" I said, and I let myself smile. Not a cruel smile, just a sad one. "That must be frightening for you." What happened next changed everything between us forever. Marcus grabbed my arm, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to try to intimidate. "You need to tell them you made a mistake," he urged urgently. "Tell them you misunderstood, that you were confused. Tell them—" "I need to tell them nothing," I interrupted, pulling my arm free. "Marcus, I'm not your accomplice. I'm not your cover. I'm not your protection anymore. I'm just the woman whose life you tried to steal so you could run away with your mistress and money that doesn't belong to you." I watched his face as the reality sank in. He'd underestimated me. For 30 years, he'd underestimated me, seen me as the support staff for his life, rather than a person with my own intelligence, my own strength, my own capacity for strategic thinking. And that underestimation was going to cost him everything. "The divorce proceedings are going to be very different now," I continued, setting down my coffee. "Catherine has filed amended documents. We're not asking for a modest settlement anymore. We're asking for the truth." "You're destroying me," Marcus said, and I could hear fear in his voice. "No," I replied softly. "You destroyed yourself. You destroyed us. You destroyed 30 years of trust and partnership. You stole from your company. You betrayed your partners. You tried to leave me with nothing. I'm just making sure everyone sees the truth." If you're still watching, I want you to stay with me, because what happened in that courtroom 3 months later was something I'll never forget, and you need to hear how this story ends. And if you believe in justice, if you believe that dignity and truth matter, please subscribe to The Mental Ground, because we tell stories about people who refuse to be victims. The divorce hearing became something much bigger than either Marcus or his fancy lawyer had anticipated. What started as a simple dissolution of marriage turned into a complex case involving asset division, fraud investigation, and multiple parties. Henderson and Associates sent their own attorneys. The SEC got involved. Marcus's mistress, Amber, suddenly disappeared from his life when she realized the money she thought she was getting access to was either frozen or didn't exist. I sat in that courtroom in my navy suit, the one I'd bought for the occasion, Catherine beside me, and I watched Marcus's world systematically dismantled by the truth he'd tried so hard to hide. His attorney tried every trick, every delay tactic, every legal maneuver. But Catherine had done her homework. Every asset Marcus had claimed was his alone, we proved was marital property. Every account he'd tried to hide, we brought into the light. But the moment I'd been waiting for came when Judge Patricia Henderson, no relation to his firm, but coincidentally sharing that name, looked at Marcus over her reading glasses and said, "Mr. Morrison, I've reviewed the evidence presented by both parties. I've also reviewed the findings of the forensic accountants from Henderson and Associates and the preliminary reports from the federal investigators." I watched Marcus shrink in his chair. The confidence he'd worn like armor that day in his lawyer's office was gone, replaced by the posture of a man who'd gambled everything and lost. "The court finds," Judge Henderson continued, "that not only did you attempt to defraud your wife of her rightful share of marital assets, but you also engaged in systematic theft from your employer and attempted to conceal those assets through fraudulent means. This court will be awarding Mrs. Morrison full ownership of the marital home, 70% of all liquid assets, the Wisconsin property, and substantial ongoing support payments. Furthermore, I'm ordering that all hidden assets, once recovered, be divided, with Mrs. Morrison receiving the majority share as compensation for your attempted fraud." The gavel came down, and with it, Marcus's carefully constructed lie of a life. But the real revenge, the real justice, came not in the courtroom, but what happened afterward. Henderson and Associates terminated Marcus and filed civil charges to recover the money he'd stolen. The criminal charges came next: federal wire fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion. Marcus went from being a respected partner in a prestigious firm to being a defendant facing potential prison time. Amber, his mistress, who he promised a life of luxury, left him before the ink was dry on the indictment. Turns out she was interested in Marcus, the successful investment partner, not Marcus, the disgraced embezzler facing federal charges. Our children, both adults now, struggled with their father's fall of grace, but they stood by me because they'd seen the truth of who had held our family together all those years. I sold the Wisconsin cabin because it held too many memories, but I kept the house. I renovated it, room by room, erasing traces of the life I'd lived with a man who'd seen me as disposable. I went back to work, not because I needed to financially after the settlement, but because I wanted to. I took a position as a financial consultant for a firm that specialized in helping women navigate complex divorces. I used everything I'd learned, every skill I'd buried during my marriage, to help other women protect themselves from men who thought they could take everything. 2 years after that courtroom victory, I was standing in my remodeled kitchen, the same kitchen where Marcus had confronted me about exposing his fraud, when my daughter, Emma, called. "Mom," she said, "I thought you should know, Dad's sentencing hearing was today." I'd stopped following Marcus's legal troubles months ago. Once the divorce was finalized, once the assets were divided, and the truth was exposed, I'd let the justice system do its work while I focused on rebuilding my own life. But I listened as Emma told me that Marcus had been sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for his crimes. 8 years to think about what he'd done, who he'd betrayed, and how his greed had cost him everything. I felt no joy in hearing that, no triumph, just a deep sense of closure. Marcus had spent 30 years underestimating me, seeing me as less than, treating our partnership as if it was his charity rather than our collaboration. He tried to take everything from me because he thought I was weak, that I was dependent, that I had no power without him. He learned the hardest way possible that he was wrong. There's something profound about the moment you realize you don't need the person you thought completed you, that moment when you understand that you are whole on your own, that your strength was always there, just waiting for the moment when you'd need to use it. Marcus tried to destroy me, but instead, he gave me back myself. I think about that day in his lawyer's office sometimes, the way he looked at me with such contempt, such certainty I was beaten. He said, "I'll take everything from you." And I think about how those words became the catalyst for my transformation. He was right that he'd take everything, but what he didn't understand is that everything he could take wasn't everything I was. My worth wasn't in the house or the accounts or the investments. It was in me, and that was something he never had the power to touch. The legal system gave me justice, the courts gave me compensation, but the real victory was internal. It was standing in that courtroom and realizing I didn't need Marcus's approval, his support, or his love to be whole. It was understanding that a woman's power isn't something granted by the men in her life, it's something inherent, something that can be buried but never destroyed. There's a photograph on my mantle now, not of Marcus and me during our marriage, but of me on the day the divorce was finalized. Catherine took it on her phone and insisted on printing it for me. I'm standing on the courthouse steps, and I'm not smiling in that forced way I used to smile in family photos. I'm smiling for real, a smile that comes from deep relief and newfound freedom. That woman in the photograph has walked through fire and come out refined rather than destroyed. I share my story now not for sympathy, but for solidarity, because I know I'm not the only woman who's been underestimated by someone who claimed to love her. I'm not the only woman who's been treated as expendable after decades of partnership. I'm not the only woman who's had to find her strength in the darkest moment of betrayal. And I want other women to know that you can survive it. You can do more than survive. You can emerge victorious, not because you destroyed the person who betrayed you, but because you refused to let that betrayal destroy you. Marcus will get out of prison someday. He'll have to rebuild his life from nothing, much like he tried to force me to do. He'll live with the consequences of his choices for the rest of his life. The prestigious career, gone. The respect of his peers, gone. The family he took for granted, gone. And the woman he thought he could discard without consequence, she's thriving. I've learned so much in these past few years. I've learned that loyalty is only as valuable as it is mutual. I've learned that love without respect is just another form of control. I've learned that sometimes the people we trust most are the ones capable of the deepest betrayal. But most importantly, I've learned that our darkest moments can become the birthplace of our greatest strength.
To everyone watching this on the mental grand, especially to the women who see themselves in my story, I want you to know something crucial. Your value is not determined by how someone else treats you. Your worth is not defined by someone else's inability to appreciate you. You are not half of someone else's whole. You are complete on your own, and anyone who belongs in your life will enhance that completeness rather than diminish it. When Marcus said, "I'll take everything from you," he thought he was threatening me with poverty, loneliness, social embarrassment. He thought the worst thing that could happen to me was being without him. But what he actually did was free me from a marriage where I was slowly disappearing, where I was making myself smaller and smaller to accommodate his growing ego. He did me a favor, though it certainly didn't feel that way at the time. The divorce became his nightmare, not because I was vindictive, but because the truth has a way of emerging no matter how deeply you try to bury it. Justice has a way of finding people who think they're above consequences, and karma, as they say, keeps receipts. I want to leave you with this final thought. If you're going through something similar, if you're facing betrayal or manipulation, or someone who's trying to make you feel worthless, remember that their opinion of you is not the truth about you. Their treatment of you is a reflection of their character, not your value. And you have more power than you realize to write the next chapter of your life. The Mental Grand is about stories of dignity, justice, and people who refuse to be victims. This was my story, and I'm grateful you stayed to hear it. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of truth and the importance of self-respect, please hit that like button. Leave a comment telling us about your own journey or what the story meant to you, and subscribe to the Mental Grand